We've been in a world of virtual communication for quite a long time, but it's only been recently that the vast majority of our communication has moved to virtual platforms. And this has created a whole new set of challenges for teams who are either fully working remotely or doing part remote and part office work. So today I wanted to talk about the perils of virtual communication and what you can do to avoid them. From my perspective, one of the biggest perils of virtual communication is that it's much more difficult to engage the people you're speaking with if it's anything beyond a one-on-one conversation. So if you're a leader who is running a meeting with your team, you need to keep in mind the fact that it's going to be much more difficult for the people who are in your meeting to pay attention for any extended amount of time. And so what you can do about this, well, there's a few solutions. The first would be try not to have meetings that are extended lengths of time in one sitting, particularly if it's a meeting where you're having to transmit information to people who are simply listening. Rather than do a 2-hour meeting, I'd recommend breaking that down into smaller chunks. But that aside, another big tip is to approach these meetings as a conversation, even if this is not what you would normally do in the office. Approaching the meeting as a conversation instead of you speaking to your team is going to inevitably engage people much more in the process. Frankly, I think this is a change that should be happening in offices also, but I think the detriment of not doing so nowadays when we're working virtually is much, much more significant. One of the other difficulties is that it is much harder at a distance on a virtual platform to be able to read people's nonverbal language. And so it's much harder to tell if somebody is disagreeing with something you've said, if somebody is confused, if somebody is checked out, because we're not sitting across from that person and able to see their full body language. Often we're only now able to see what is on the face instead of the full body, which gives us less clues. And then we also have the challenge of having very tiny thumbnails of multiple people at a time, and it's almost impossible to catch nonverbal information the way we would if we were sitting in a room together. So what's really important to do when you're running these meetings on virtual platforms is to be much more explicit in asking for feedback from people. Clarify very frequently whether they've understood, if they have questions. Leave a lot more space for people to ask questions and get to the bottom of things they're not understanding. Because when this isn't happening, what happens at the end is that people have sat through an hour-long meeting and they haven't really gotten much out of it or retained much of it. And this is what I am hearing so much nowadays from organizations, is that they feel that productivity has just tanked. And a piece of it is that we need to rework how we're having virtual meetings, how we're using virtual communication to fit the platforms that we're using in a way that optimizes people's communication skills. And the more you can focus on making the adaptations needed to use these platforms in the best way possible, the more you're going to find that engagement and productivity start to come back in your teams.